Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little smokier. A time when dinner wasn't just cooked, it was hunted, charred, and occasionally fought back. We're heading straight into the Stone Age kitchen, where every meal was an experiment in survival, and every fire was one mistake away from turning your cave into an oven. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe put on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to the Stone Age kitchen. There's no cookware here, no utensils, and no real plan. Just fire, rocks, and optimism. You reach for the nearest stick, poke at the embers, and blow gently. The fire responds by coughing a plume of smoke directly into your face. Tears stream down your cheeks. You've invented the world's first emotional cooking experience. Fire is still a mystery at this point. Nobody's quite sure how to make it. You just hope to steal some whenever lightning sets a tree ablaze. The flame becomes sacred, guarded like a newborn, because if it dies, you'll be reduced to gnawing raw meat again. Archaeologists believe early humans first learned to control fire nearly 2 million years ago, but true cooking didn't catch on until much later. That means for hundreds of thousands of years, people just stared at fire like confused cats wondering if it was edible. Eventually someone got brave. Maybe you, maybe the guy beside you. Either way, you decided to toss a piece of raw meat into the flames to see what happens. It sizzled, smoked, and filled the cave with the intoxicating smell of not death. You bit into it, burned your tongue, and instantly realized something profound. This was better. This was food that didn't fight back. Cooking changed everything. Fire softened meat, broke down tough fibers, and killed parasites. Suddenly, you could digest food faster, absorb more energy, and think longer. Scientists call this the cooking hypothesis, which basically says fire made you smarter, and probably more annoying, because now you had the brain power to argue about whose turn it was to gather sticks. But experimentation came at a cost. You didn't know which plants were edible, which roots were toxic, or which berries were about to make you see colours that don't exist. Archaeological evidence shows prehistoric humans burned everything: meat, seeds, even poisonous plants, trying to figure out what wouldn't kill them. In short, the first chefs were also the first guinea pigs. If dinner didn't poison you, it made the menu. If it did, well, it was a learning experience for everyone else. And yet, through the coughing and chaos, something amazing happened. Flavour. Pure accident, of course. The smoke clung to the meat, giving it that rich, charred aroma. Compounds like guaiacol and syringol, the same ones that make modern barbecue so irresistible, were discovered entirely by mistake. Somewhere in that cave, someone bit into a burnt chunk of mammoth, squinted thoughtfully and thought, actually, not bad. And just like that, humanity became addicted to smoky food and self-inflicted indigestion. Your kitchen, if we can call it that, is a logistical nightmare. The floor is covered in ash, bones, and half-eaten roots. Your cooking tools are sticks, flat rocks, and occasionally your own hands. Pots haven't been invented yet, so if you're boiling anything, it's in an animal stomach tied shut at the ends. When it bursts from the heat, congratulations again. You've just invented prehistoric soup and a small explosion. The air grows heavier as the smoke thickens. Your lungs ache, your skin glistens with soot, and your hair smells like roasted mammoth fat. Studies suggest that living in smoke-filled caves gave early humans chronic lung disease, the Stone Age version of chain smoking. But you don't care, you're proud. You've taken nature's chaos and made it edible. For the first time, you can sit with others, share a meal, and not worry that it's still twitching. This was the birth of community. Firelight meant safety, warmth, and gossip about who nearly burned the cave down. Sharing cooked food meant sharing trust. It also meant sharing whatever bacteria was still clinging to your hands, but hygiene wasn't exactly trending yet. The prehistoric meal wasn't about taste. It was about survival, and maybe a little bit of bragging rights. You take a bite of your latest creation, a chunk of something that might once have been deer. It's black on the outside, raw in the middle, and somehow both too hot and too cold. You cough, your eyes water again, and a small part of your brain wonders if this is progress or punishment. But you chew anyway, because this is what evolution tastes like. Still, as the flames flicker and smoke curls toward the cave ceiling, something inside you stirs. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's lung damage. Either way, you've just changed the course of human history. You've turned fire into food, chaos into comfort, and survival into art. But if you think cooking with fire was risky, wait until you see what happens when prehistoric humans start fermenting their food. Because that's when dinner didn't just smoke, it started to bubble, stink, and occasionally explode. You're still crouched beside the fire, your eyes red from smoke and your lungs staging a small protest. The flames crackle, and the smell of half-burnt mammoth clings to everything you own, which isn't much. You've officially become the first person in history to risk lung disease for dinner, and while your culinary career began with fire, it's about to evolve in a far more disgusting direction. Because humans, being endlessly curious and occasionally desperate, soon realized that cooking wasn't just about survival, it was about experimenting, and nothing says experimentation like prehistoric meat storage. You glance at the remains of yesterday's mammoth feast and notice something strange. The meat has changed colour. The edges glisten with a thin, shiny film that smells suspiciously like regret. Welcome to the birth of leftovers. Before refrigeration, before salt, and long before common sense, prehistoric people discovered that meat could be preserved if you just left it outside. Technically, that's not preservation, it's rot. But in a world where hunger beat hygiene every time, aged mammoth might have seemed like a gourmet choice. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age humans often cached food underground or under snow to keep it fresh. Unfortunately, fresh in 200,000 BC meant less maggoty than usual. Rotting meat was only the beginning. Early humans learned that fermentation could make certain foods last longer, and sometimes even taste better. This discovery likely happened by accident. Imagine leaving a chunk of fruit or grains sitting in a puddle too long, then realizing it produced a bubbling, sour-smelling liquid that made you feel dizzy but somehow happier. Congratulations again, you've just invented alcohol. Evidence from ancient residues found in clay pots from China shows that people were fermenting drinks nearly 9,000 years ago. But chances are, your prehistoric self was already dabbling with nature's happy accidents long before that. The line between spoiled food and culinary innovation was thin, and usually crossed by someone too hungry to care. As your tribe starts to understand these strange chemical miracles, the world's first chefs begin to emerge. Not chefs in tall hats, of course, but in soot-covered animal hides, poking things with sticks and declaring them probably safe. These primitive food pioneers discovered that fermenting grains and roots created strange, frothy results that were part drink, part science experiment, and entirely questionable. The smell was intense, the bubbles unnerving. But after a few sips, the world felt lighter, the cave seemed warmer, and the howling outside somehow less terrifying. And so, humanity's oldest love affair began. Not with fire, but with fermentation. Your mouth tastes like burnt meat and curiosity. You grab a piece of something vaguely edible, perhaps dried fish or a root that's been roasting for hours, and take a bite. The flavour is somewhere between dirt and despair, but it's nutritious, sort of. Archaeologists have found grinding stones dating back nearly 30,000 years, used to crush grains into rough flour. That means people were making early versions of bread long before agriculture existed. Of course, without yeast or proper ovens, this bread was just baked sludge, dense, grey, and about as appetizing as a rock. Yet it represented progress. You could now travel longer, feed more people, and chip a tooth in exciting new ways. Meanwhile, the kitchen itself was evolving. Those smoky fires in caves gave way to outdoor hearths built with stones arranged in circles. It was still dangerous, but at least slightly less likely to suffocate the entire family. The idea of communal cooking grew too. Sharing food meant sharing labour, and sharing labour meant social bonds. Around that campfire, language evolved faster than ever. Words like burnt and why does it taste like that probably dominated prehistoric vocabulary. Fire wasn't just about nutrition anymore. It was about community, storytelling, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to hunt something with tusks. You shift closer to the fire, feeling the warmth seeping into your hands. The crackle of wood becomes the soundtrack of human advancement. Without realizing it, you and your ancestors are turning cooking into culture. Those who mastered fire ate better, lived longer, and produced offspring clever enough to complain about their food. The kitchen had become humanity's greatest invention, right after tools and collective complaining. And yet, for all this progress, the prehistoric menu remained limited. Most meals were meat-based because plants were unreliable. Vegetables existed, but many were bitter, fibrous, and occasionally lethal. The first edible plants were probably discovered through sheer determination and unfortunate trial. Some tribes figured out how to soak roots in water to remove toxins. Others learned that certain leaves, once boiled, became safe. The result was often something so bland it made rocks look flavourful, but it filled stomachs. You might not be dining in style, but you were at least dining alive. The true challenge wasn't cooking, it was finding food at all. The Ice Age wasn't exactly known for its abundance of grocery stores. Hunting required patience, teamwork, and an alarming disregard for personal safety. You and your companions would track massive beasts across frozen plains, armed with stone-tipped spears and an unreasonable level of optimism. When the kill finally came, it was an all-hands event, butchering, roasting, drying, and feasting before the cold set in again. The smell of roasted meat drifted across the tundra, both a celebration and an invitation for every predator within 5 miles. If you've ever eaten dinner while nervously scanning the horizon for giant cats, you've experienced the essence of prehistoric dining. As you sit back and watch the fire dance, your eyes catch on the cave wall again. Paintings of animals, hunts, and strange shapes flicker in the glow. Those weren't just decorations, they might have been recipes. Archaeologists suspect some cave art depicted hunting techniques, animal anatomy, or even early forms of food symbolism. Instructions passed down visually long before writing existed. In a sense, your ancestors created the world's first cookbooks, scrawled in ochre and soot. They didn't need measurements or ingredients, just the memory of what worked, and the scars to prove what didn't. The night deepens, the smoke thickens. Somewhere outside, the wind howls through the frozen grasslands. You chew the last bite of your meal, which tastes slightly better than dirt but worse than imagination. Still, you feel satisfied. Not because it was delicious, but because it meant survival. Every bite, every burn, every smoky breath was shaping the human body and brain toward the future. Fire had turned food into energy, energy into thought, and thought into curiosity. You were no longer just eating to live. You were living to create, to experiment, to understand why things worked. And that curiosity will not stop here. Because once humanity masters cooking and fermentation, the next great experiment begins, preserving food for when there is none, which means salting, drying, smoking, and occasionally burying things you probably shouldn't. So sit tight. The prehistoric pantry is about to get a lot more questionable. You lean closer to the fire, the glow flickering across your soot-streaked face as the scent of charred meat fades into the night. The tribe has eaten, the smoke has settled, and for a brief moment life feels almost civilized. But that illusion burns away quickly. Because while cooking was humanity's greatest breakthrough, cleaning up after it was humanity's greatest punishment. Welcome to the forgotten side of prehistoric cuisine. Food safety. before safety was a thing anyone could pronounce. The concept of hygiene doesn't exist yet. You've got no soap, no running water, and your kitchen tools are a questionable mix of bone shards, sharp rocks, and your own filthy hands. Every meal is a microbial lottery. Archaeological studies of prehistoric tools show microscopic traces of both animal fat and fecal matter, meaning cross-contamination wasn't an accident. It was standard practice. You'd slice meat, wipe the blade on your thigh, then use the same tool to dig in the dirt for roots. Congratulations, you've just invented food poisoning. It's not just the tools. The ground itself is a buffet for bacteria. You prepare your food on rocks that animals have been walking on for centuries. You drink water from streams conveniently located downstream from where other animals drink, bathe, and die. And yet, somehow, you're alive. That's because the human immune system evolved under constant assault, trained by a million invisible enemies hiding in every bite. Scientists now believe that exposure to dirt and bacteria in prehistory actually strengthened human immunity. In other words, being filthy probably saved your life, though it also ensured you'd never taste anything without a hint of soil again. Then there's the meat problem. You've just brought down a massive animal, maybe an auroch or a bison, and now you've got thousands of pounds of flesh to process before it rots. Without salt or smoke preservation, you've got about 2 days before the smell turns biblical. Ancient people tried everything to delay decay, burying meat in snow, hanging it in trees, even coating it in animal fat to keep the flies off. None of these methods worked particularly well. In cold regions, frozen storage helped. But in warmer climates, aged meat was just a polite way of saying infested. Bones found at early human sites show cut marks mixed with insect burrows, proof that maggots were as much a part of the meal as the meat itself. You don't waste anything, of course. Every part of the animal has a purpose. The bones are crushed for marrow, the hides turned into crude wraps or cooking pouches, the tendons used for binding tools. The stomach becomes a pot, the intestines an early form of sausage casing, and the blood a nutritional bonus. It's a system so efficient that even modern sustainability experts might applaud it, if they could ignore the overwhelming stench. Anthropologists have found residue from bone grease rendering at sites over 200,000 years old. That's when early humans began boiling smashed bones to extract every last calorie. It was the prehistoric version of recycling, except it made your cave smell like a boiling corpse. You stare into the fire again, watching the fat pop and spit into the embers. The smoke carries the aroma of your efforts into the cold night air. That smell doesn't just feed you, it defines you. Fire-cooked food was a beacon for miles, announcing to every predator nearby that a meal had been prepared, and not just for you. The earliest cooks were also bait. Paleolithic sites often show animal tracks surrounding fire pits, evidence that cooking was as much a survival risk as a culinary triumph. Imagine standing guard over your dinner while half blind from smoke, clutching a sharpened stick, praying the wind doesn't shift. You weren't just a chef, you were the night's entertainment. And yet, despite the danger, the diet expanded. Humans began testing everything they could chew, sniff, or accidentally inhale. Seeds, tubers, mushrooms, insects, even bones ground into powder. Nothing escaped experimentation. Archaeologists in southern Africa found evidence of roasted starchy plants, dating back 170,000 years, which means someone discovered how to make primitive roasted roots long before farming. You can picture the scene. A hungry human digs up a plant, tosses it in the fire out of boredom, and bites into something hot, sweet, and chewy. For the first time, flavour came from plants instead of accidental charcoal. But plants came with a price. Many early species were toxic before humans learned how to process them. Cyanide-containing roots, alkaloid-heavy berries, and hallucinogenic mushrooms filled the prehistoric landscape. People learned what was edible mostly by trial and error, with the error part sometimes ending abruptly. Archaeologists have found traces of toxic plants like foxglove and hemlock in ancient settlements, suggesting that our ancestors didn't always get the recipe right. Those who survived the experience passed on their hard-earned knowledge, while everyone else passed out permanently. You pick through the remains of your dinner, gnawing on a scorched bone. The taste is bitter, smoky, and vaguely metallic, but it's satisfying. Not just because you're full, but because cooking has turned chaos into control. Each meal teaches something new: which woods burn best, which meats taste better half raw, which plants can kill you, and which can make you see the gods. Over generations, this knowledge hardens into culture. People begin teaching recipes, not written ones, but oral traditions tied to ritual and survival. What began as necessity has become identity. The fire pops again, sending sparks into the dark. Beyond the cave, the world is silent except for the rustle of predators circling the camp. You shift closer to the light, instinctively knowing what every human would feel for the next 200,000 years, that food means safety. But that safety depends on your fire, your wits, and your stomach's ability to digest questionable meat. In many ways, you're not just cooking, you're testing evolution itself, one burnt meal at a time, and soon things will only get more complicated. Because humanity's taste for risk doesn't stop at fire or fermentation. As you'll discover next, the prehistoric kitchen is about to go mobile. Hunters start carrying their meals across continents, storing them in skins, wrapping them in leaves, and learning that travel-sized dining comes with travel-sized disasters. You grip your crude spear tighter, its stone tip still stained from the morning hunt. Your stomach rumbles as the smell of a roasted meat drifts from the fire pit behind you, but there's no time to relax. You're part of the earliest mobile kitchen in human history, the travelling cookout that fueled entire migrations. Prehistoric cuisine didn't stay in one cave forever. It packed up, crossed mountains, and nearly froze to death on the way. You've just joined humanity's first food truck. Only yours runs on foot, smells like smoke and fear, and occasionally gets chased by saber-toothed cats. Hunter-gatherers had to adapt their recipes to the land itself. No farms, no storage, no supermarkets. Just whatever didn't kill you after chewing. Archaeologists call this the broad-spectrum revolution, when humans began eating practically everything edible. Shellfish, roots, nuts, seeds, small game. Nothing was too strange to try. In prehistoric Europe, evidence shows people roasting snails as early as 30,000 years ago. Meanwhile, in what's now Africa, ancient hearths are filled with burned fish bones and charred hippo fat, proof that our ancestors were turning entire ecosystems into buffets. You were what you could catch, and that was rarely glamorous. Cooking on the move was a disaster of logistics. Fires had to be rebuilt daily, using dry wood scavenged from whatever wasn't already being eaten by termites. Clay pots cracked under sudden heat, so you carried animal bladders and skins filled with water and grain paste instead. Those became the first portable stews, simmering awkwardly beside the campfire. You could drink them, chew them, or spill them all over your legs while running from predators. Efficiency wasn't the goal, survival was. Still, the wandering chefs of prehistory managed to create surprisingly sophisticated meals for people without kitchens. Excavations in Israel's Jordan Valley uncovered ancient grinding stones smeared with residue from wild wheat and barley. That means people were making flour roughly 23,000 years ago, thousands of years before farming. They roasted the grains into something between porridge and bread, then probably forgot it by morning because their only refrigerator was the cold ground. You can imagine the pride of the first baker who accidentally dropped dough into hot ash and discovered crust. Humanity has been burning bread ever since. While grain was spreading, meat remained the star. Early cooks learned that drying strips of meat in the sun kept them edible for weeks, sometimes months. This wasn't jerky as you know it. It was prehistoric shoe leather with nutritional ambition. Archaeologists have found racks of mammoth ribs used for drying meat in Ice Age camps, showing that preservation was a full-time job. The process worked. but only if you ignored the flies, the mould, and the occasional scavenger that tried to steal dinner. By the time you tore off a bite, you weren't just eating meat, you were eating the entire history of its exposure to nature. You squat beside the fire, stirring a small pot made from a hollowed gourd filled with boiled roots and crushed seeds. It smells earthy, which is a nice way of saying muddy soup, but it's warm and full of carbohydrates, and that's enough to keep you walking tomorrow. Cooking gave humans energy that raw diets never could. It reduced chewing time, improved digestion, and turned calories into brain power. Scientists estimate that early humans spent nearly half their waking hours chewing before cooking was invented. Fire turned those hours into minutes, freeing time for creativity, tool making, and arguing about whose turn it was to fetch wood. Still, the risks were endless. Fires went out in storms, food spoiled overnight, and entire migrations could be halted by famine. In colder regions, the search for food led to innovation. Frozen mammoth meat was stored under snow or buried in permafrost, where it could last for months. But in warmer climates, people learned to smoke meat over slow fires. Charred animal bones found in caves from southern Africa to France show that smoking was one of the earliest preservation techniques. It kept food longer and added flavour, even if it also made you smell like a chimney forever. Not all innovations were pleasant. Some tribes learned that certain poisonous plants became edible only after hours of soaking, boiling, and scraping. Cassava, still eaten in many parts of the world today, contains cyanide if not processed correctly. Archaeological evidence from early human settlements suggests that prehistoric people already understood the need to detoxify certain foods. That means the first food scientists were just tired cooks trying not to die from dinner. Trial and error were the only recipe, and failure was often fatal. As you travel further, the terrain changes. You follow rivers, watching as the tribe's food habits shift with the landscape. Along the Nile Valley, people roast fish and dry it under the sun, creating some of the first seafood preservation methods. In what's now the Middle East, early cooks baked grain pastes on flat rocks, the ancestors of flatbread. And across Ice Age Europe, people grind nuts and seeds into oily pastes, prehistoric peanut butter that probably broke more teeth than it filled stomachs. The global menu is expanding one painful experiment at a time, but this culinary progress also changes how people live together. Shared cooking leads to shared planning, which leads to permanent camps. Anthropologists believe that regular communal meals may have sparked early social hierarchies: who hunted, who cooked, and who got to eat first. Fire pits became the first dining tables. The best hunters brought prestige, but so did the best cooks, especially the ones who didn't poison the tribe. Over time, cooking wasn't just survival. It was identity, status, and maybe even the earliest version of bragging rights. The one who controlled the fire controlled the future. You sit down to eat your share, watching sparks drift upward into the dark. The wind carries the smell of wood smoke and meat across the camp, mingling with the sharp scent of sweat and earth. You take a bite of the day's creation, a mix of roasted grain, mashed roots, and something that might have once been animal. It's chewy, gritty, and oddly comforting. You've eaten worse, probably yesterday. But in this moment, you're part of something greater. The first global kitchen, fueled by curiosity, hunger, and pure stubbornness. Your mind drifts as the fire dies lower. The coals glow red, the night stretches wide, and for a fleeting second you feel connected to every cook who ever lived. From this crude fire pit to future ovens, every spark of heat will carry the memory of these first meals. But your thoughts are cut short by the unmistakable sound of something large moving in the dark. You grab your spear, heart racing, realizing that in prehistory, every dinner came with a side of danger. Because when you cook in the wild, you're never the only one drawn by the smell of food. Soon, the human race will learn to fight for its meals in ways that make even this look civilized. The next step in your culinary evolution isn't about what you cook, but how you defend it. And when the first true conflicts over food begin, the prehistoric chef becomes something new. A soldier with a skillet, and history's first battle for supper is about to begin. The smell of smoke still lingers on your hands as you walk away from the fire, belly full but instinct sharp. Out here, food isn't just nourishment, it's power. The scent of roasting meat travels for miles across the open plains, calling to predators and hungry neighbours alike. And that's how humanity's next great culinary crisis began, not in a kitchen, but on a battlefield. Because the prehistoric chef didn't just cook for the tribe, they fought for it. Competition over food shaped the entire course of human evolution. Early evidence from Paleolithic sites shows that groups clashed over hunting territories long before villages existed. You might imagine prehistoric life as peaceful cooperation, but in truth, it was survival economics. When two tribes discovered the same herd of mammoths, or the same berry-rich valley, they didn't negotiate, they fought. Stone tools that once sliced meat became weapons. Spears, originally designed for hunting, found new use in ensuring you got to keep your dinner. Archaeologists studying fossilized remains at Jebel Sahaba in the Nile Valley found skeletons riddled with flint points dating back 13,000 years. These weren't random accidents. They were evidence of organized violence, one of the earliest signs that humanity would rather kill than go hungry. And the causes of these conflicts weren't limited to big hunts. Cooking itself became a territorial act. A fire pit was a sign of ownership. Whoever controlled the flame controlled the food. Anthropologists believed that the social structure around early fires was a critical step in human cooperation, but it also created hierarchy. Some people gathered wood, others prepared food. A few sat closest to the flame, eating first. It was the beginning of power by proximity. The better your position around the campfire, the higher your social rank. And if someone tried to edge closer to your heat, they might find themselves tasting a spear instead of stew. Of course, these weren't wars as we'd recognise them. They were chaotic, messy brawls over calories. But as humans evolved and spread across continents, competition for food and territory only intensified. By around 10,000 BC, people began settling into permanent communities during the Neolithic Revolution, domesticating plants and animals. For the first time, food could be stored, and that changed everything. Suddenly, raiding became profitable. Why risk chasing a mammoth when you could steal your neighbour's grain? Archaeological evidence from early farming sites shows signs of burned villages and fortified walls. Humanity's first stored harvests didn't just feed the tribe, they inspired theft, siege, and defence. The prehistoric chef was becoming an accidental soldier. Your role as cook now carries weight. You're no longer just roasting what you hunt, you're protecting what you grow. Every loaf of ancient bread and pot of grain porridge represents hours of labour, so when someone raids your settlement, they're not just stealing food, they're taking survival itself. You can feel the shift in priorities. Spears are no longer just for hunting animals, they're for guarding food stores. Historians call this the foundation of civilization, though from your point of view it feels more like the foundation of organised food theft. Communal meals now require defence. The first villages in the Fertile Crescent show traces of fire-hardened walls and ditches dug to keep invaders out. And while these settlements marked progress, they also brought new culinary challenges. Stored grain attracted pests, not just rats and insects, but humans with fewer morals than recipes. People developed early preservation techniques to hide or protect their supplies. Clay pots sealed with mud, pits lined with ash, even decoy storage piles meant to trick thieves. Your once simple campfire dinner has turned into a full-time operation of logistics and paranoia. Still, for all the conflict, food innovation flourishes. By now, humanity has tamed barley, wheat, lentils, and peas. In the Middle East, goat and sheep herding begins to replace hunting. In China, rice cultivation transforms the landscape. In Mesoamerica, corn and beans appear. Everywhere, people are turning nature into cuisine. But with agriculture comes monotony. You used to eat whatever you could find, but now you eat whatever grows nearby. Early farmers were shorter, weaker, and more disease-prone than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. The first chefs may have achieved stability, but they sacrificed variety. Archaeological studies of ancient bones show increased malnutrition and tooth decay during this period. In short, civilization gave humanity bread and cavities at the same time. You chew a handful of roasted grains, grateful to be alive but tired of the same earthy taste. There's no salt, no spice, no joy, just sustenance. Food, once thrilling and dangerous, has become dull, and yet your tribe can now survive winters and droughts without starving. It's a trade-off, less adventure, more survival. But even as you grind your meal into mush, you can sense humanity's next obsession forming. Cooking is about to become more than necessity. It's about to become art. That art begins small. Someone leaves meat over the fire too long and discovers that smoky flavour tastes better. Another tries grinding herbs into a stew and notices it masks the smell of spoilage. Across the globe, people start experimenting with flavour the way their ancestors experimented with fire. Spices, roots and minerals become the prehistoric world's first culinary luxuries. Traces of garlic, mustard seed and coriander have been found in pottery fragments dating back nearly 6,000 years. These weren't random ingredients. They were early attempts at cuisine, and perhaps at showing off. If you could afford flavour, you had power. But power brings attention, and attention brings danger. When rival tribes smelled your cooking from miles away, they didn't just come to trade, they came to raid. Many early settlements were destroyed not for gold or resources, but for food. Archaeological layers in sites like Çatalhöyük in Turkey and Jericho in Palestine show repeated burn levels from conflicts likely caused by competition over farmland and grain. The prehistoric chef, once the heart of the community, had become a target. You watch the fire flicker lower, embers glowing in the dark. The smoke rises into a sky full of stars, and for a moment the world feels vast again. You think about how far humanity has come, from roasting meat over open flames to defending entire stores of grain. Every meal tells a story of innovation and violence, of hunger and hope. You realize that cooking didn't just feed civilization, it built it, one risky meal at a time. But the story doesn't end with farming or fighting. Humanity's taste for flavor, control and survival will soon drive another revolution. People will learn to harness clay, metal and time itself to cook in ways their ancestors couldn't imagine. The next stage of your prehistoric kitchen is about to become technological. Fire will give way to ovens, pottery and something that finally resembles a recipe. And while it might sound like progress, it comes with its own disasters, including explosions, toxins and the first recorded case of accidental culinary science. You crouch beside the fire again, this time surrounded by tools that look more advanced but are still terrifyingly unstable. The tribe has entered a new age of experimentation. The old cracked rocks and burned sticks have been replaced by strange clay bowls, hardened in the flames until they almost resemble real cookware. Almost. Humanity has finally discovered pottery, the prehistoric equivalent of non-stick cookware that sticks to everything. This new technology changes cooking forever, and possibly your chances of survival. The idea of shaping earth into pots seems harmless enough. You scoop wet clay from the riverbank, mould it into something vaguely bowl-shaped, and let it dry. Then, just like everything else you own, you shove it into the fire and hope for the best. What comes out is either a masterpiece or a pile of molten sludge. Archaeologists have found fragments of clay pots dating back over 20,000 years in China and Japan, among the oldest evidence of ceramics in human history. Those early pots were thick, uneven, and often exploded mid-firing, scattering shards like primitive landmines. Every attempt at progress came with the risk of shrapnel in your dinner. Still, when it worked, it was revolutionary. For the first time, people could boil food instead of just roasting it. That simple change opened up an entirely new menu. Boiling made tough roots edible, grains digestible, and meat broth possible. Nutrients that used to burn away in the fire now simmered gently into soup. This single invention transformed the human diet, and possibly our entire digestive system. Studies suggest that boiling softened starches and fibres so efficiently that it allowed our intestines to shrink over generations, conserving energy for brain growth. In short, pottery gave humans both soup and intelligence, two things we've been spilling ever since. Of course, boiling wasn't without hazards. Clay pots cracked under sudden heat, spilled easily, and absorbed whatever you cooked inside them. You could never quite tell whether your next meal would taste like stew or the residue of the last 6 dinners. Cleaning them was nearly impossible, so most prehistoric chefs simply didn't. Instead, they let residue build up layer by layer, forming what archaeologists call cooking crust. Analysis of those carbonized layers reveals an entire prehistoric diet. Fish oils, grains, animal fats, and the occasional hint of mystery meat that probably shouldn't have been eaten in the first place. Imagine your kitchen pan never being washed for 10 years, then multiply that by a few thousand. Congratulations, you've invented prehistoric flavour. The fire pops, and the pot in front of you rattles like it's alive. You stare nervously as bubbles form and steam hisses out the sides. The mixture inside is a questionable stew of grains, dried roots, and something that used to crawl. Steam scalds your hand as you try to lift the vessel with a stick. Somewhere nearby, someone sneezes violently, probably from inhaling too much clay dust, and you realise early cooking wasn't just about hunger. It was a constant series of small injuries and long-term lung problems. Archaeological studies of Neolithic burials show traces of silica in ancient skeletons, evidence of respiratory disease from grinding grain and working clay. Each meal was literally carved into your bones. The new cooking methods also changed the economy of eating. Pots meant storage. You could keep food longer, carry water farther, and hide supplies from scavengers. Villages began forming around reliable food sources, and with them came division of labour. Someone gathered plants, someone cooked, someone inevitably complained. As settlements grew, pottery evolved from crude clay to artistic expression. Decorative lines, carved handles, and pigments began appearing on vessels. Cooking was turning into culture. Your pot wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of your tribe's identity, and occasionally of your terrible luck when it exploded. With pottery came the first complex recipes. Evidence from Japan's Jomon period shows that ancient people were stewing fish, nuts, and wild vegetables together as early as 14,000 BC. In North Africa, fragments of clay pots hold traces of animal fat from similar stews. People were combining ingredients deliberately, creating consistent flavour profiles instead of random char. This was the dawn of cuisine. But it also introduced a new problem: sanitation. Boiling could kill bacteria, but stagnant water and reused cooking pots created breeding grounds for new ones. Parasites like tapeworms and roundworms thrived in ancient communities, passed easily from undercooked meat to clay bowls to human intestines. In prehistoric terms, your dinner was both nourishing and vengeful. You stir your pot again, watching the thick mixture bubble ominously. Somewhere in that mess is progress. You can taste civilization forming, one burnt edge at a time. Clay transformed the relationship between humans and fire. It tamed the chaos, contained it, made it portable. For the first time, food wasn't just hunted or scavenged, it was planned. That shift may seem small, but it laid the groundwork for agriculture, trade, and organised meals. Archaeologists argue that cooking in pottery might have inspired the development of social rituals around dining. Sharing soup meant sharing trust, since poisoning someone with bad broth was an easy mistake to make. Still, the prehistoric kitchen was far from peaceful. The new technology brought competition. Pottery became a resource as valuable as meat or grain. Villages raided one another not only for food, but for pots. Broken fragments from ancient sites often show signs of deliberate smashing, evidence of early culinary sabotage. The first chefs weren't just cooks. They were artisans guarding trade secrets, clay recipes, and fire temperatures. One wrong move and you'd be left holding a handful of shards while your dinner seeped into the dirt. You blow gently over the bubbling stew, hoping to cool it before your pot gives out. The scent that rises is faintly pleasant, smoky and rich, with hints of roasted grain and desperation. The first sip burns your tongue, but it's worth it. Warm food, smooth texture, flavour that isn't purely ash. Humanity has finally made something resembling comfort food. Yet as you drink, you realise the balance has shifted. Cooking is no longer spontaneous. It's planned, structured, controlled. And once humans begin controlling food, they start controlling each other. The next era will bring storage pits, trade routes, and entire cities built around food production. The humble prehistoric chef, armed with a cracked clay pot and poor ventilation, will become a figure of authority. Meals will no longer be just survival. There'll be politics, religion, and power. And as humans start hoarding grain, brewing drink, and offering meals to the gods, the kitchen will evolve into something far stranger, a sacred battleground between hunger, greed, and superstition. The fire burns lower tonight, its light glimmering against rows of clay pots stacked like trophies from a hard-won battle. Your tribe has grown larger, and with it, your responsibilities as cook have multiplied. Food is no longer a matter of chance. It's the rhythm of daily life, the centre of ritual, the reason people gather, fight, and occasionally worship the smoke curling from your fire. You've gone from roasting scraps of mammoth to feeding a community, and while that sounds noble, it's a nightmare of logistics, superstition, and early culinary disasters that would make even the bravest chef reconsider lighting a flame. The kitchen has officially become sacred territory. In nearly every prehistoric culture, cooking evolves from necessity into ceremony. You're not just feeding bodies anymore, you're appeasing forces you don't understand. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that many early societies believed fire itself was divine. In ancient hearths across Europe and Asia, animal bones are found arranged deliberately in circles or lined with ochre pigments. These weren't random leftovers, they were offerings to the unseen powers believed to control life, death, and dinner. To spill food into the flames wasn't wasteful, it was worship. You've entered the first temple of cuisine, and unfortunately you're the priest. Cooking in this world isn't about taste, it's about fear. Everything can kill you, from bad shellfish to angry spirits. You stir the stew with a carved stick, muttering words you half remember from an elder who swore that chanting stopped food from spoiling. Early religion and cooking were intertwined, born from the same desire to make sense of nature. Evidence from Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, one of the oldest ritual sites on Earth, suggests that ceremonial feasting came before farming. People dragged animals for miles just to cook them in communal pits lined with stone. These weren't simple meals. They were spiritual events fueled by hunger and awe. The first great banquets of history began with someone like you, sweating beside a fire, praying the gods didn't hate their seasoning. But spirituality had a cost. As soon as food became holy, it became restricted. Certain animals were off limits, others were required for ritual. Some ingredients could only be handled by designated cooks. Congratulations, you're now bound by culinary law. Archaeological studies of Neolithic societies show that taboos about food appeared early. Rules about what could be eaten, when, and by whom. In some cultures, women cooked, but couldn't eat first. In others, only the leader or shaman could consume certain animals. Each bite became a political act. You weren't just a chef, you were an enforcer of cosmic order. As settlements expanded, so did superstition. The earliest agricultural villages relied on ritual feasts to ensure good harvests. In Mesopotamia, traces of charred barley and animal bones have been found buried beneath early granaries, offerings meant to feed the gods who guarded the crops. In ancient China, cooking fires were maintained continuously inside homes as a symbol of life and prosperity. If the flame went out, disaster was certain. Your kitchen wasn't just a place to eat anymore, it was an altar. The wrong move could doom the whole village, and you were the one holding the ladle of fate. The workload grows heavier. Your fire must burn day and night, the pots must remain full, and the hungry mouths waiting outside multiply faster than the food can cook. The invention of agriculture has made starvation seasonal instead of constant, but that only makes the failures worse. Archaeological evidence from early farming settlements like Çatalhöyük shows layers of burned dwellings, not from war but from kitchen accidents. Wooden homes, open fires and clay ovens were a combustible combination. The first recorded cases of mass property damage caused by culinary enthusiasm likely happened here. It's one thing to burn a meal, it's another to burn the neighbourhood, and when things go wrong, people look for someone to blame. The cook is the easiest target, a spoiled batch of grain. Must be your fault. The stew made everyone sick. Clearly you angered the gods. In early societies, food poisoning wasn't seen as bacteria, it was seen as punishment. The same hands that fed the tribe could be accused of cursing it. Some anthropologists believe that these fears evolved into the earliest witchcraft accusations. A cook whose food made others ill could be exiled or worse. Your ancestors were the first chefs, yes, but also the first scapegoats. You're standing at the beginning of culinary fame and culinary persecution, both boiling in the same pot. Despite the constant threat of divine disapproval you push forward, every meal is a lesson in chemistry, even if you don't know the word yet. People begin experimenting with fermenting grains not just for preservation, but for ritual. What starts as a bubbling accident of barley water and wild yeast becomes the foundation for beer. In the ancient Near East, residues on pottery show fermentation as early as 7000 BC. It wasn't just for drinking. Beer was safer than water and became part of religious ceremony. You might not understand the science, but you've discovered that bubbling liquid makes people cheerful and cooperative. Civilization owes its first teamwork session to someone forgetting a bucket of grain in the rain. You can feel your influence spreading. People travel from nearby villages to share food and ideas. Recipes, if they can be called that, begin circulating. Roasted grains here, boiled roots there, fish dried with herbs along the coast. Culinary exchange is born long before trade routes or written language. Archaeologists have found identical cooking styles thousands of miles apart, suggesting that techniques travelled through migration and storytelling. You're part of a global conversation spoken entirely through flavour. The Prehistoric Chef has become the first cultural ambassador, spreading innovation with every pot and fire pit. But with fame comes imitation, and imitation brings accidents. You can't patent fire, and the moment one tribe sees another with better food, they try to copy it. Unfortunately, imitation often ends in disaster. Burned fields, exploded pots, and entire stores of food lost to overconfidence. The history of cooking is also the history of failure, written in charred remains and soot-covered ruins. For every successful stew that advanced civilization, there were 100 that ended in coughing and regret. The fire before you crackles softly, its warmth steady, its light ancient. Around it, people talk, laugh, and eat, unaware that they're participating in a revolution of their own making. You realize that the act of cooking, this simple smoky ritual, is shaping human behavior in ways no one can yet comprehend. It creates order, hierarchy, communication, and superstition all at once. You're not just making food, you're making culture, and yet, even as civilization begins to simmer, it's far from stable. The new age of organised cooking brings new risks: famine, over-farming, and dependence on weather. The same fields that feed thousands can fail overnight. The chef's fire has grown brighter, but it's still fragile. Soon you'll face the first true crisis of abundance, when humanity learns that storing food for the future can just as easily lead to ruin. The prehistoric kitchen is about to learn the meaning of spoilage on a civilizational scale. You sit before the fire again, its glow now reflected on something new: bronze. The clay pots have been replaced by gleaming tools that shimmer under the flames, and with that small shift, everything you know about cooking has changed. Humanity has entered the Bronze Age, and your kitchen has evolved from a smoky cave corner into a metallic laboratory of progress, pride, and absolutely terrible safety standards. You're about to discover that when humans start mixing metal with food, it becomes less of a meal and more of a controlled explosion. The first bronze cookware appears around 3000 BC, right alongside humanity's first organised civilizations. Archaeological digs in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley reveal copper and bronze vessels used to heat liquids, fry grains, and brew beer. They gleam beautifully. Their beauty is deceptive when your main ingredient is molten metal. To make bronze, early metallurgists smelted copper and tin together at over 1000 degrees Celsius. It was revolutionary, but also incredibly toxic. Copper fumes can cause metal fume fever, a charming illness that makes you cough, sweat, and hallucinate. Your prehistoric kitchen has officially become a health hazard with better plating. Metal changed not only how people cooked, but how they viewed cooking itself. Suddenly food became a symbol of wealth and technology. Bronze cauldrons and skillets were expensive, meaning only elites could afford them. In early city-states like Uruk or Thebes, cooks working in temples and palaces had access to metal pots, so fine they doubled as art. Meanwhile, the average farmer was still burning grain in a cracked clay bowl. The kitchen had divided into classes. On one side, royal feasts filled with boiled lamb, honeyed wine and spiced grain. On the other, peasants gnawing on flatbread and chewing grit. Archaeologists studying wear patterns on ancient teeth have found microscopic traces of stone dust, the result of flour ground on sandstone. In short, lower-class meals came with a side of minerals. Metal tools also introduced a new problem: cleanliness. Unlike porous clay, which absorbed flavour and bacteria equally, bronze was smooth and durable. Great news for durability, bad news for anyone cleaning it with river water full of microbes. Ancient cooks scrubbed with sand, ashes, or whatever gritty material was available, which meant many pots developed tiny scratches that trapped food particles. Those scratches became home to bacteria and fungi. Historians have recreated ancient recipes and found that, after a few days, even boiled stew began to develop slimy layers. The world's first cookware upgrade came with the world's first leftovers that could fight back. Still, these gleaming pots gave birth to culinary creativity. In Mesopotamian ruins, researchers discovered the world's oldest written recipes, etched into cuneiform tablets over 3,700 years ago. They describe dishes like stews made from lamb, onions and garlic cooked in beer, humanity's earliest comfort food. In Egypt, wall paintings show servants roasting geese and baking bread in conical ovens. The Bronze Age cook had tools, technique and ambition, but also a tendency to die young from heat, burns, or inhaling too much copper dust. You can almost smell the progress: rich, metallic, and faintly poisonous. And yet, metal cooking transformed the human diet beyond recognition. Stews thickened, breads baked evenly, and meat could finally be seared instead of scorched. Cooking became precise. Archaeological residues show that early cooks used different metals for different tasks: copper for boiling, bronze for roasting, and eventually tin for baking. These choices weren't just practical, they were aesthetic. Civilization's first chefs were also its first scientists, experimenting with heat distribution long before thermometers existed. The culinary arts had officially arrived, along with frequent kitchen-related hospitalizations. With greater cooking power came greater food production, and with that, larger populations. Cities needed specialists, bakers, brewers, and butchers, each with their own dangers. In Babylonian markets, bakeries operated massive communal ovens that stayed hot day and night. Workers fed them with straw and dung to keep the temperature steady. The air was thick with soot and yeast, and most bakers died with lungs that looked like they'd spent a lifetime inhaling volcanoes. Meanwhile, brewers brewed barley beer in enormous bronze vats, fermenting it with wild yeast, and storing it in sealed jars. The process worked well enough that beer became the foundation of daily life. In Sumeria, labourers were paid in beer rations around 2 litres per day. Civilization, it seems, was built by tipsy chefs. You ladle a bubbling mixture into a bronze bowl, careful not to touch the scorching sides. The stew smells like triumph, though it's unclear if that's the meat or the metal. The heat of these new tools makes everything cook faster, but it also brings new flavours, and by flavours, we mean chemical reactions. Tiny flakes of copper and tin dissolve into the food, giving it a distinct tang that historians now recognise as an ancient taste of toxicity. Over time, chronic exposure caused vomiting, fatigue, and organ failure. The ruling class, with their elaborate feasts, suffered the worst. Archaeologists examining royal remains from the Bronze Age found high levels of copper and lead in their bones, proof that civilization's first elite chefs were slowly seasoning their masters to death. Even utensils evolved. Early knives, spoons, and skewers emerged from metal workshops. People could now slice thin cuts of meat, creating dishes that required finesse instead of brute force. But precision brought pretension. Banquets became performances, filled with complex plating and ritualized servings. In ancient China, cooks created multi-course meals for nobles using elaborate bronze vessels called ding, each decorated with intricate designs and inscriptions. These weren't just pots, they were status symbols, sometimes buried with their owners to prove eternal culinary superiority. Imagine working your whole life as a cook, only for your masterpiece to end up in a grave. The more advanced the cookware became, the more dangerous the kitchen grew. Metal pots required constant heat, meaning the fires had to burn hotter and longer. Ancient kitchens were literal furnaces with limited ventilation and endless sparks. Excavations at Mycenaean palaces show charred ceilings and collapsed hearths, evidence that kitchens regularly caught fire. You're standing in history's first professional hazard zone. One misstep, and your stew becomes a pyre. Despite the chaos, the world outside your smoky kitchen is changing fast. Trade routes are spreading across continents, bringing spices, salt, and strange ingredients. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka, pepper from India, and garlic from Central Asia find their way into Bronze Age markets. These luxuries transform cooking again, turning once simple meals into experiments in taste and extravagance. But with every new flavour comes dependency. Empires rise on trade, and when trade falters, famine follows. Archaeological records show that when tin became scarce around 1200 BC, bronze production collapsed, and with it, the kitchens that depended on it. Civilizations fell, ovens went cold, and the art of cooking reverted to survival mode once more. You stare into the embers, realizing that progress never truly stops. It just burns itself out and starts again. Metal brought refinement and ruin, flavor and failure, wealth and war. The prehistoric chef has become a craftsman, a chemist, a tradesman, and a victim of their own ambition. But humanity is already reaching for something greater, something hotter and more precise than fire. Soon, stone and bronze won't be enough. The world is about to learn the power of the furnace, and with it, the next chapter of cooking, when iron enters the kitchen and the prehistoric chef becomes a blacksmith of flavour and smoke. The bronze glow of your pots has barely cooled before someone decides they can do better. They start hammering something darker, stronger, and far less forgiving into shape. Iron. It's heavy, unpredictable, and impossible to melt in a normal fire. But humans being humans, they find a way. Within a few centuries, the world's kitchens will never look the same. You, the prehistoric chef, are about to meet your new co-worker, the blacksmith, and together, you're going to turn cooking into an industrial hazard that somehow doubles as progress. Iron changes everything. It's the strongest material your ancestors have ever handled, and its introduction around 1200 BC reshapes both warfare and cuisine. Archaeological sites from Anatolia to China show a rapid shift in cooking tools as iron replaces bronze. Cauldrons, spits and knives suddenly become cheaper and more durable. The age of gleaming elite cookware is over. Now everyone can own something that burns their hands equally well. Iron democratized cooking the way smartphones democratized distraction. The new metal opens the door to real heat control for the first time. Bronze warped under high temperatures, but iron could withstand direct flame. Early blacksmiths forged pots that sat directly over roaring fires, allowing for faster boiling, better frying, and a new phenomenon that would dominate the next few thousand years. Burnt food that tastes amazing. Historians call it the Maillard reaction. It's the chemical process that makes seared meat, baked bread, and roasted grains develop complex flavours. You might call it the smell of progress, though the smoke billowing into your lungs calls it something else entirely. Cooking with iron wasn't as elegant as it sounds. It required furnaces that reached over 1,200 degrees Celsius, fueled by charcoal. That meant deforestation on a scale never seen before. Charcoal pits consumed entire forests to feed both smelters and kitchens. Studies of ancient pollen samples show massive declines in tree populations during the Iron Age, especially in Europe and the Near East. Every time someone enjoyed a well-cooked meal, a small woodland disappeared somewhere nearby. Dinner now came with an environmental footprint roughly the size of Mesopotamia. You lift your iron pot from the fire and realize another unpleasant truth. Iron rusts quickly. The same chemical magic that gives you superior heat also ensures your cookware constantly tries to return to the dirt it came from. Without oil or seasoning, every pot becomes a red-brown sponge of corrosion. Historians have found traces of rust inside Iron Age cooking vessels, proving that ancient stews often contained more iron than nutrition labels would recommend. On the bright side, accidental iron intake probably helped combat anemia. The bad news is that every bite also tasted faintly of blood and rainwater. Still, the advantages outweighed the drawbacks. Iron allowed for larger cauldrons, thicker pots, and the first real frying pans. Communal feasts could now feed entire armies, which is convenient because armies were growing fast. The same furnaces that made cookware were also making weapons. In the Iron Age, the line between cook and soldier blurred completely. A pot could become a shield. A spit could become a spear. Archaeological digs in Celtic and Greek sites have found that old cooking vessels were often reforged into armour and weapons, recycling the same metal that once cooked stews into tools for killing. The kitchen had officially joined the battlefield. This overlap gave birth to one of history's oddest roles, the military cook. Armies discovered that feeding soldiers mattered almost as much as arming them. The Hittites, Assyrians, and later the Greeks all employed designated cooks who travelled with their troops, hauling cauldrons, knives, and sacks of grain. These early chefs were part craftsman, part strategist, and part emergency medic. They boiled meat in iron pots so large that modern archaeologists sometimes mistake them for ceremonial vessels. The food was terrible, but it kept men marching. If you've ever complained about army rations, you can thank these pioneers for inventing the concept of edible disappointment. Iron also transforms how food is prepared at home. In the Mediterranean, blackened ovens begin appearing in homes around 900 BC. These primitive iron-lined chambers allowed for baking bread and roasting meat with consistent heat. They also filled homes with smoke so thick that respiratory diseases became common. Studies of ancient skeletons from Greece and Rome reveal high levels of carbon particles in the lungs, particularly among women, who did most of the indoor cooking. Civilization, it seems, was being built one cough at a time. You glance at your reflection in the pot's dark surface. It's warped, streaked with soot, and smells faintly metallic. Around you, the kitchen has turned into an echo of a forge. Sparks fly as the fire flares, heating both dinner and the air you're supposed to breathe. Yet there's no denying the results. Food cooks faster, stays hotter, and somehow tastes better. Iron introduced consistency to cooking. For the first time, you can replicate recipes. Archaeological evidence from the Indian subcontinent shows that iron griddles were used for flatbreads, like early chapatis and dosas, proof that culinary tradition was already forming around this stubborn metal. Humanity had invented flavour memory, but even progress can overheat. As iron spread, so did specialisation. Entire workshops emerged just to craft cookware, and with them came trade. Blacksmiths in one region made pots that ended up hundreds of miles away. Ancient trade networks across Eurasia carried both iron tools and the knowledge of how to use them. Historians can trace the spread of cooking technology through identical soot patterns found on pots from different cultures. It's proof that humanity was united by two universal truths: hunger and the tendency to burn things. The iron pot eventually gave birth to something even more transformative: the cauldron culture of Europe. These enormous vessels weren't just used for food, but for rituals, feasts, and even brewing early forms of beer. The Gundestrup cauldron, found in Denmark and dating to around 100 BC, stands over half a metre tall and is decorated with scenes of gods and warriors. It may have held enough stew to feed an entire tribe. Archaeologists believe such cauldrons symbolised abundance and unity. They were the prehistoric equivalent of the family table, only forged in molten metal and big enough to drown in. You stir your pot one last time, feeling the weight of the iron handle pull against your wrist. The soup inside simmers thick and rich, dotted with ash, herbs, and history. Around you, civilization is shifting again. The Iron Age chef has mastered tools, temperature, and technique. Cooking has become a profession, a symbol of progress, and occasionally a reason for deforestation. But in the flicker of the firelight, you can sense the next transformation already approaching. Metal has given humans control, but control breeds curiosity. The world is about to grow restless for flavour, complexity, and spectacle. Soon, kitchens will become theatres. Meals will move from survival to ceremony, from necessity to indulgence. The next stage of human cooking will introduce the banquet, the feast, and the first real concept of fine dining. And when that happens, the prehistoric chef will evolve once again, not into a scientist or a soldier, but into something far more dangerous. A professional with an audience, where every dish must impress or risk starting a riot. The air is thicker now, heavy with spice and smoke and the hum of something entirely new. Civilization that has learned to feast. The fires that once burned in lonely caves now roar behind palace walls. You're no longer a wandering cook scraping charred roots from the ground. You're a culinary craftsman serving kings, priests, and people who wear more jewellery than hygiene. The prehistoric chef has evolved into a spectacle, and your kitchen is the stage. What was once survival has become performance, and the first great feasts of history are about to begin. It starts with power. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and early China, food becomes a currency of influence. The cook who feeds the ruler holds more sway than the hunter who brings the kill. In ancient Babylon, temple kitchens were state institutions, run by entire staffs of professional cooks, bakers, and brewers. Clay tablets from 1750 BC list ingredients for royal banquets that included roasted lamb with garlic, leek stews thickened with barley, and honey-sweetened cakes. These weren't just meals, they were propaganda, edible proof that your ruler could command both gods and goats. Archaeologists studying palace refuse heaps have found piles of animal bones arranged by species and cut with astonishing precision. Every feast left behind a fossilized record of excess. Egypt takes it further. Paintings inside tombs show cooks kneeling beside great braziers, roasting ducks and geese while servants pour wine into golden cups. The wealthy believed that their afterlife needed catering too, so they buried entire pantries with them. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs filled with bread, dried fish, jars of beer, and even entire slabs of salted beef that somehow survived 4,000 years. These eternal leftovers still bear knife marks from the hands of cooks, who likely died centuries before their masterpieces were served in spirit. It's history's earliest version of working unpaid overtime. The feast becomes theatre in the ancient Near East. Guests recline on couches while servants parade food through the halls. Musicians play, dancers sway, and the air smells like roasted lamb and unwashed ambition. The kitchen behind the curtain, however, is chaos. Fires roar, pots boil, and slaves hack through carcasses with bronze and iron knives, racing to keep pace with the endless demand. Archaeological traces from palatial kitchens in Ugarit and Mycenae show huge hearths blackened with soot and drains clogged with animal fat. Cooking for a god king means working in a furnace where every mistake is punished by the nearest overseer with a stick. You've gone from hunter to servant, and the job now comes with dress code violations that can end careers or lives. Still, humanity's obsession with spectacle drives invention. The earliest ovens designed for bread and pastry appear in this era, dome-shaped clay structures heated with wood and sealed to trap heat. You can finally bake instead of just roast. The result is bread that rises, both literally and socially. In Mesopotamia, loaves are marked with cylinder seals, the world's first trademarks, identifying the temple or palace that produced them. Food branding has officially been born. Meanwhile, beer brewing becomes a science. The Sumerians refined fermentation so completely that they credit a goddess, Ninkasi, as the patron of brewing. Her hymn, carved into tablets around 1800 BC, doubles as the oldest surviving recipe in the world. Humanity's first multi-tool was not a hammer or plough, but a recipe sung like a prayer. Of course, not everyone gets to enjoy the show. While the elites gorge on delicacies, the common people survive on porridge, onions and beer so thick it's eaten with a straw. Archaeological evidence from worker settlements in Egypt shows a diet dominated by barley bread and lentil stew, with occasional dried fish if the Nile felt generous. Malnutrition was rampant. Dental analysis of skeletons from this period reveals severe tooth wear from sand that blew into bread dough, turning every meal into an edible grindstone. The same civilization that built pyramids on full stomachs did so while its labourers slowly eroded their molars into dust. You wipe your hands on your apron, the air in your kitchen shimmering from the heat of half a dozen ovens. Around you, assistants scramble with baskets of dates, figs, and onions. Someone drops a platter of spiced goat, and for a moment you wonder if anyone outside this palace realizes that cooking for gods is mostly panic and sweat. But you don't have time to dwell. The master of ceremonies calls for the next course. Honey-glazed pigeons stuffed with herbs, a delicacy so prized that it appears in ancient Hittite texts. Your hands move automatically. Crack bones, fill cavities, tie with sinew. Somewhere outside, a crowd applauds the sight of their ruler chewing. In these early kitchens, food becomes a form of magic. Every ingredient carries symbolism. Honey represents immortality. Salt purifies. Bread embodies life itself. To prepare food is to control these powers, and that makes you both respected and feared. Cooks in ancient temples were often trained alongside priests, performing purification rituals before preparing sacred offerings. Some recipes were never written down, passed only by word of mouth under penalty of death. You don't just feed people now, you feed gods, armies, and superstition alike. The culinary technology keeps improving. By 1500 BC, portable stoves appear in Greece and Egypt, allowing cooks to control heat more precisely. In China, bronze tripod pots known as ding are used for both cooking and ritual, and their designs become symbols of dynastic authority. Whoever controls the ding controls the mandate of heaven. A kitchen utensil has become a weapon of political legitimacy. You realise your job has gone from survival to sacred duty to statecraft, and somehow your apron still smells like burnt onions. But beneath the opulence and ritual lies a darker truth. Feeding the powerful demands a workforce of the powerless. The earliest cookbooks, like the Babylonian Akkadian culinary tablets, list ingredients like lamb, garlic and leeks, but not measurements or instructions. They weren't meant for ordinary people. They were written for professional cooks who already knew the craft. cooks who lived and died in anonymity. Archaeological evidence from palace kitchens shows bone deformities caused by repetitive labour and heat stress. The world's first culinary professionals were also the first overworked and underappreciated. The feast reaches its crescendo. Torches flare, the drums beat, and platters the size of chariot wheels are carried into the hall. The ruler raises a cup of beer, and the crowd roars. You stand in the smoke-filled doorway, too tired to cheer, watching as civilization celebrates the art you helped invent. Food has become culture, religion, politics, and pleasure all at once. Humanity has learned to eat not just to live, but to display power, wealth, and identity. Yet even as the feast fades and the fires dim, the future is simmering. Civilization's appetite is growing, and with it, the complexity of its kitchens. Trade will bring new ingredients, empires will bring new tastes, and cooks will find themselves not in temples or palaces but on the road, feeding soldiers, travellers, and the hungry masses who keep history moving. Soon, your kitchen won't be a palace at all. It will be a campfire surrounded by armed men who believe they can conquer the world on an empty stomach. And you, as always, will be the one trying to make that impossible meal happen. The celebration fades. The banquet hall grows quiet, the torches burn low, and for the first time in centuries, cooking begins to move away from the temples and palaces. Your next kitchen has no marble walls or golden serving trays. It's a campfire in a field, a dented pot hanging over smouldering embers, and the sound of marching feet echoing across the earth. You've now become a military cook in the prehistoric age of conquest, and your diners are armed, sweaty, and perpetually hungry. You've fed kings and gods before, but feeding soldiers, that's a new level of suffering. Food has always fueled warfare. Archaeological evidence from early Mesopotamian city-states shows that the first organised armies were sustained by massive grain stores, ration systems and field kitchens. Tablets from around 2500 BC list daily rations for soldiers, barley, onions and beer, measured out with mathematical precision. These weren't just meals, they were logistics, edible fuel for conquest. Without cooks, no army could march, and without marching, civilization itself would never have expanded. Every empire began with someone like you, crouched beside a fire, stirring something vaguely edible with a stick. The earliest evidence of battlefield cooking comes from Bronze Age Europe. Excavations of Celtic and Germanic encampments reveal enormous iron cauldrons capable of feeding hundreds at a time. These cauldrons weren't merely practical, they were sacred symbols of unity. Warriors believed that eating from the same pot bound them together in battle. The residue inside them, a sticky mix of animal fat, barley and ash, tells the story of meals that tasted like victory, smoke and mild regret. Scientists analysing these remains found traces of mead and honey, suggesting that even on campaign, warriors still wanted their dinner slightly festive. But cooking for armies wasn't glamorous. The average prehistoric soldier ate whatever didn't rot first. Dried meat, salted fish, flatbread, and if they were lucky, a handful of lentils boiled in muddy water. Ancient Egyptian military records show that soldiers carried portable rations called dura, a mix of ground grain and water baked into hard cakes. These lasted for months and could double as both food and emergency building material. In Greece, hoplites carried barley flour they mixed with water to make pasty dough on the march. Roman soldiers perfected the art of misery centuries later, but even in prehistory the military diet was a masterclass in dental punishment. Cooking for an army meant mastering preservation. Salt, smoke, and drying became your best allies. Archaeologists studying early battlefields in Anatolia discovered remnants of smoked beef and fish stored in ceramic containers, evidence that soldiers travelled with mobile pantries. The same methods that fed the army also changed society. Salt became so valuable that entire trade networks emerged to supply it. The word salary literally comes from salt, because early soldiers were sometimes paid with it. Civilization's first paycheck came sprinkled on dinner. Your job as cook also meant staying alive, which was harder than it sounds. Armies marched for weeks with little food or clean water. Contaminated rations could cripple entire campaigns. Skeletal remains from early military sites show signs of dysentery and parasitic infection, proof that sanitation in field kitchens was non-existent. Boiling water helped, but boiling everything also destroyed any flavour. The first wartime chefs didn't just fight bacteria, they fought morale. Feed soldiers well, and they'd follow their commander into hell. Feed them poorly, and they'd mutiny before breakfast. Still, ingenuity thrived even in chaos. In the early Iron Age, nomadic armies like the Scythians perfected mobile cooking. They roasted meat inside the stomachs of animals, sealed with clay and buried under hot coals. Archaeological digs along the Eurasian steppe have uncovered burned pits filled with animal remains and clay fragments, likely from these makeshift ovens. It was crude but effective, a prehistoric slow cooker powered by desperation. The meat inside cooked tender, soaked in its own juices and smoke. Culinary historians might call it innovation. You'd call it Tuesday. The logistics of feeding an army forced humans to think differently about food production. Large-scale farming developed not just to feed civilians, but to maintain soldiers. Grain wasn't just a crop anymore, it was strategy. The storage pits found in Bronze Age fortresses weren't only for survival during siege. They were the world's first military supply chains. Every grain of barley was a bullet in waiting. Cooks were no longer simply servants. They were tacticians with spoons. You ladle out a portion of stew to a row of exhausted warriors sitting in the dirt. Their faces are streaked with ash, their armour dented, their stomachs growling louder than the enemy. You know the recipe by heart now. Meat scraps, onions if you're lucky, and water so murky it looks philosophical. No one complains. Hunger makes gourmets of everyone. There's no applause, but when they eat, their shoulders relax, their spirits lift, and the camp feels human again. History will remember the battles, but not the cooks who kept them standing. Every major civilization learned this lesson. The Assyrians maintained travelling bakeries for their legions. The Hittites invented portable ovens to bake bread on the move. In China's Zhou dynasty, mobile bronze pots known as lai were carried in wagons to prepare food for thousands of soldiers. The remains of these ancient kitchens show scorch marks and carbon layers so thick they could tell you exactly how many campaigns a pot survived. Cooking wasn't just nourishment anymore, it was industrial. But the job came with new dangers. Armies often camped near rivers, not for beauty, but for water to cook and clean. Those same rivers carried disease. Typhoid, cholera, and parasites spread like wildfire through contaminated supplies. Archaeologists studying early military burials have found evidence of epidemic outbreaks linked directly to spoiled rations. The phrase, "an army marches on its stomach," wasn't poetic. It was tragic biology. The prehistoric chef's failure could collapse an empire. Even religion marched alongside the army kitchen. Warriors believed food connected them to their gods. Before battles, cooks prepared ritual feasts using animal sacrifices. Burned bones found in ancient altars near battlefields suggest soldiers ate the offerings before combat, believing the god's strength passed through the meal. If you cooked it wrong and the army lost, you didn't need an enemy to kill you. The survivors would handle it. Night falls over the camp. The fires burn low, the smell of stew mixing with sweat, blood and smoke. You sit alone, scraping the bottom of the pot with a bone spoon, too tired to eat. Around you are the sounds of men sleeping, dreaming of home, or not dreaming at all. The stars above are the same ones that watched over the first cooks who learned to boil water, and the same ones that will watch over the last. Every age believes it has mastered fire, yet every age burns something new. You glance at the pot and realise it's more than metal. It's civilization condensed. The same flame that cooks a meal also forges a weapon. The same skill that feeds an army can destroy one. In your hands lies both comfort and chaos, and soon As the world shifts toward empire and empire shifts toward luxury, that same fire will ignite another transformation. Cooking will return indoors, but not to the cave. This time it will move into cities, where smoke rises not from battle, but from the birth of commerce, restaurants, and the first recorded cases of food poisoning as a business expense. The smoke from the campfire fades into the rising dawn, and with it the sound of marching disappears over the horizon. The wars slow, the fields grow fertile again, and for the first time in human history, people begin to settle down in real cities. You've followed fire from cave to battlefield, but now your kitchen has walls, markets, and customers with opinions. Welcome to the prehistoric city, where cooking becomes commerce, and the world's first restaurants are born. Unfortunately for you, that also means the world's first food critics, health inspectors, and menu-related riots are about to make your life miserable. The oldest cities in the world, places like Uruk, Mohenjo-Daro, and Thebes, were not only centres of trade and writing, but also of food. Archaeologists have uncovered entire districts dedicated to baking, brewing, and street cooking. Clay ovens, charred grains, and broken serving pots litter these sites like ancient Yelp reviews. In Mesopotamia, streets were lined with food stalls selling bread, fish, and stews. Inscriptions from around 1700 BC mention ale houses, where you could buy a meal with beer and gossip about how terrible the local ruler was. You might call it civilization's first restaurant. The concept was simple. Cook one big pot of something vaguely edible, feed whoever could pay, and hope no one died. Cooking for the public sounded easier than feeding an army, but it wasn't. For starters, refrigeration didn't exist. Food spoiled faster than political alliances. In ancient Mesopotamia's heat, meat left out for a few hours could summon an entire ecosystem of bacteria, maggots, and regret. Cooks relied on salt and smoke, but that only delayed the inevitable. Archaeological tests on ancient kitchen residues show high levels of salmonella and listeria, meaning everyone was constantly one stew away from a medical crisis. The first restaurateurs were less chefs and more biological experiments in progress. Still, people couldn't resist the convenience. Eating out became a way of life. In ancient Egypt, workers near the pyramids lined up at open-air food stands for bread, lentils, and beer. In Greece, tavernas sold roasted meat, fish, and vegetables. In Rome, thermopolia, fast food shops, appeared on nearly every street. Excavations at Pompeii reveal counters built with deep holes for clay jars called dolia, which held hot stews and wine. The soot stains still visible today show where vendors kept the fires going all day. The food wasn't always fresh, but it was affordable. Most city dwellers didn't have private kitchens, so eating out was essential. You can thank ancient landlords for inventing takeout culture. You glance around your new workspace, a cramped stall wedged between a potter's shop and a man who sells questionable perfume. Your tools are basic: a clay oven, a few bronze pots, and a small pile of barley and dried herbs. The air outside reeks of sewage and smoke, which conveniently masks the smell of overcooked fish. Your customers arrive early, shouting orders in languages you only half understand. You ladle out stew thickened with whatever's available that morning: onions, lentils, or something that looks suspiciously amphibian. They eat it without complaint, because taste is a luxury and calories a survival. The rise of commerce brings something you didn't miss on the battlefield: regulations. Early governments realized that controlling food meant controlling people. In Mesopotamia, King Hammurabi's code included laws about tavern owners and food merchants. Selling watered-down beer or shorting customers could get you executed. In ancient Egypt, bakers who cheated on bread weight were publicly beaten. Food safety wasn't just a matter of health, it was law, and the punishment was always theatrical. Archaeologists have even found scales embedded in ancient kitchens, not for measuring ingredients, but for avoiding arrest. Cooking for crowds also meant adapting to new ingredients brought in through trade. The Silk Road and its predecessors carried spices, fruits, and grains across continents. Cinnamon from India, dates from Arabia, and sesame from Africa began appearing in urban markets. Suddenly, food wasn't just fuel, it was status. Spices were so valuable that they were traded like currency. A handful of peppercorns could buy you land in Rome, or in your case, bribe your way out of poisoning a nobleman. Civilization's first celebrity chefs were merchants with better marketing. But cooking in cities introduced a new horror: fire. Urban kitchens packed with ovens, oil, and straw roofs were time bombs waiting for a spark. The great fires of history were often born from someone's dinner. In ancient Rome, open flames in taverns were blamed for multiple city-wide blazes. Archaeologists studying ancient layers of soot have found evidence that most kitchens burned down at least once per generation. Insurance didn't exist, but arson accusations did. Every city had at least one cook who accidentally torched half the neighbourhood. You wipe sweat from your brow as you stir a pot bubbling with barley stew and lamb fat. It's the city's favourite dish, according to the tax collectors who eat for free. A rat scurries across the counter, pausing just long enough to remind you that hygiene remains an abstract concept. Disease spreads easily here. Bones unearthed in early urban burial sites show traces of malnutrition and parasitic infection. The world's first restaurant employees were also the world's first foodborne illness survivors. Civilization, it seems, was always one meal away from collapse, and yet, cooking becomes art. In Greece, philosophers debate flavour balance while servants actually cook it. In Rome, cookbooks emerge for the first time. The most famous, attributed to a chef named Apicius, includes recipes for flamingo, peacock and stuffed dormice, the kind of dishes that scream wealth and bad taste in equal measure. The instructions are vague, but the intention is clear. Cooking has transcended survival. It's now theatre for the elite and exhaustion for everyone else. The profession of cooking evolves into a social hierarchy. Wealthy households employ specialised staff: bakers, butchers, brewers, and spice masters. Cooks gain prestige but also suspicion. Ancient texts warn against them, calling them deceitful, wasteful, and occasionally sorcerous. People believed cooks could manipulate the body and soul through food. In Egypt, temple chefs performed purification rituals before preparing offerings. In Rome, poisoning scandals often involved kitchen staff. Feeding someone became both an honour and a threat. By night you stand in your stall, the flames flickering against the clay walls. The street hums with laughter, drunken songs, and the clatter of empty bowls. You've survived the day without burning down the city or being accused of witchcraft. That counts as success. Civilization has turned food into a business, and business into culture. For the first time, people can pay for flavour instead of just survival. But history never stands still. The city's appetite will keep growing. Trade will expand, recipes will spread, and food will become politics. Soon, the kitchen won't just feed soldiers or peasants. It will feed empires. Spices will fund wars. Sugar will build colonies. The world's palate is about to stretch across oceans, and with it, your job as a chef will become even harder. Because when humanity learns to chase flavour across continents, dinner stops being local and starts tasting like conquest. The smell of the city lingers on your skin: smoke, sweat, and something that might be fish or might be crime. You've survived the market kitchens and fed everyone from beggars to bureaucrats, but civilization is changing again. New routes are opening. Strange ingredients are arriving from faraway lands, carried by ships that disappear as often as they return. Trade has turned cooking into exploration, and exploration into something almost religious. You're no longer just a chef. You're a pioneer of flavour, though your ingredients include diseases, rot, and the occasional poisonous curiosity someone insists is edible. Welcome to the prehistoric global kitchen, where discovery always comes with nausea. The first great ingredient exchange begins quietly. Around 3000 BC, merchants start ferrying spices, grains, and livestock between distant regions. The Silk Road won't officially exist for another 2,000 years, but the prototype is already here. Trade caravans winding across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Archaeologists have uncovered residues of cinnamon in Bronze Age tombs in the Middle East, even though the nearest cinnamon trees grew thousands of miles away in Sri Lanka. That means someone, somewhere, carried a bag of bark across deserts and mountains, just so a king stew could taste fancy. Humanity's obsession with flavour has officially gone international. Spices were more than seasoning, they were alchemy. Long before refrigeration, pepper, salt and cinnamon disguised the flavour of aging meat. They were also thought to have magical and medicinal powers. In ancient Egypt, cumin and coriander were placed in tombs to ward off decay. In India, turmeric was used as both a dye and an antiseptic. And in China, ginger became so valuable it was used as currency. A handful of ginger roots could buy you a goat, a servant, or a divorce, depending on how creative you were. Archaeological finds of spice traces in pottery and trade manifests prove that entire economies were built around flavour. The new global menu didn't stop at plants. Animals joined the journey too. Chickens, originally domesticated in Southeast Asia, spread west into Persia and Europe by 1000 BC. Cattle and sheep moved east, goats migrated south, and pigs spread everywhere because pigs always do. Each new species brought new recipes, new tools, and new diseases. Evidence from early settlements shows outbreaks of zoonotic infections that coincide with the spread of animal domestication. Your ancestors may have invented the roast, but they also invented the flu. Food trade reshaped geography itself. Coastal settlements sprang up where spices could be loaded onto ships, creating the world's first culinary superhighways. In the Arabian Peninsula, merchants carried dried dates, frankincense, and saltfish across deserts that would kill anyone without proper rations. In return, they brought exotic luxuries: saffron from Persia, cardamom from India, and nutmeg from islands no one could find twice. These ingredients became symbols of prestige. A pinch of imported spice could prove wealth more effectively than gold. Archaeological digs in elite tombs confirm this, with traces of foreign resins and herbs buried beside the dead. The afterlife apparently needed seasoning too, and you can picture it now. You're crouched beside your fire, grinding imported pepper with a stone mortar, while a nearby merchant brags that his shipment of cinnamon travelled farther than your ancestors ever did. The spice clings to your fingers, its scent rich and sharp. It's intoxicating. Not just the smell, but the idea of holding something from another world. In this moment, cooking feels like sorcery. You're mixing continents, cultures, and microbes in a single pot. The Prehistoric Chef has become a global ambassador, one sneeze away from starting the first pandemic. The spread of ingredients also spreads inequality. While the wealthy dine on exotic imports, the poor still eat barley, onions, and anything that doesn't fight back. In Mesopotamia, records from temple kitchens show detailed lists of spices used for the upper classes, while common rations rarely included flavouring at all. Archaeologists examining skeletal remains of lower-class citizens found signs of nutrient deficiencies compared to elites. Civilization's first taste divide had begun. The concept of rich food wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. But as trade flourishes, so does innovation. New tools appear to handle the new ingredients. Bronze mortars, grinding stones, and sieves become standard kitchen gear. In China, archaeologists have uncovered early steamers from the Shang dynasty, proving that steaming as a cooking technique dates back over 3,000 years. In Greece, the first grills emerge, turning cooking into performance art. People gather around fires not just to eat, but to watch. Food becomes entertainment, and chefs become early celebrities. Your profession, once anonymous, now carries fame and risk. Burn the wrong stew for the wrong noble, and your next gig might involve joining the ingredients. Trade also changes how humans think about preservation. Salted fish from Phoenicia appears in markets across the Mediterranean, carried in sealed amphorae that doubled as ancient shipping containers. In China, soy fermentation begins, eventually giving rise to sauces that could preserve flavour for months. These discoveries weren't just culinary triumphs, they were survival tools that allowed empires to grow. Archaeological chemical analyses of amphora residues have revealed traces of fish sauce, wine and olive oil traded as far as northern Europe, an astonishing feat for a world without refrigeration, compasses or common sense. You stir your pot again, the broth simmering with imported herbs. The smell is divine, the cost catastrophic. Somewhere, a ship has sunk in a storm, taking an entire year's supply of nutmeg with it. Somewhere else, a merchant caravan lies buried in sand, its camels mummified mid-trek. The global spice trade is as deadly as it is profitable. Ancient records mention merchants vanishing by the hundreds along the routes. Entire settlements disappeared under dunes or into jungles chasing the promise of flavour. Every meal in a palace carried the invisible ghosts of those who died to deliver its ingredients. And still, people want more. Trade expands further, pushing into Africa, Europe and Asia. Archaeological finds in Bronze Age Scandinavia reveal traces of imported sesame oil, a product that would have travelled over 3,000 miles to reach the edge of the known world. That's the prehistoric equivalent of overnight shipping, only with more starvation. The more flavours humans discover, the more they crave. It's not enough to eat well anymore. Food must impress, dazzle and symbolise empire. The prehistoric kitchen has become a stage for global ambition. Night falls, and you sit by the dying fire surrounded by the day's spoils. Strange roots, dried leaves, foreign powders, and a few confused chickens that don't belong here. You've helped transform human culture through taste. You've fed armies, cities, and kings. You've turned survival into luxury and curiosity into addiction. But you also know the cost. The world's appetite is endless, and every discovery only creates more hunger. The fire flickers lower, casting shadows that dance like sails on unseen oceans. You sense that this is only the beginning. Humanity's obsession with food will soon launch entire fleets across seas, spark wars over sugar, and build empires on spice. The prehistoric chef's work has set the table for centuries of conquest. And soon, when explorers take to the water in search of the next great flavour, the world itself will become a kitchen, one that occasionally explodes. If you enjoyed learning just how disgusting, dangerous and surprisingly creative prehistoric cooking could be, don't forget to let me know in the comments which historical catastrophe you want to taste test next. And if you find comfort in listening to centuries of human suffering disguised as bedtime stories, go ahead and check out my other videos. They're packed with even more misery, flavour and questionable life choices. Sleep well, and remember, somewhere in history, someone's dinner tried to kill them so yours doesn't have to.